Below the surface of the earth lies a magnificent kingdom ruled by the physical manifestations of God on earth. A land whose people live for hundreds of years and employ complex technologies that we mere surface dwellers could never understand. Now, you won't find this place on any sort of map, and even if you did, the journey to get there would be nigh on impossible. Ladies and gentlemen, I am talking about Agartha. Hello, everybody. I am back from my brief absence. I've been getting up to a lot. What have you been getting up to? I don't know. Seriously, though, it's been a little bit since I've posted my last video, and I'm excited to see you all here again joining me. You've probably noticed I have some new decorum now. OSU college somehow accepted me. I have more than doubled the belts since last time, and I've hung up a few original R. Kelly paintings. But yeah, I've been meaning to make a comeback, and I feel like I finally found a topic that's absurd enough that I can just drop it all on you, pretend like I didn't leave for about 8 months, and call everything square. So I'm here back at it again with what I think is going to be my longest video to date, which not that hard. I only have 3 other videos. So I don't even know why I'm acting like me leaving is a big deal. There's only not even 70 of you. You get what you get. So the legends of Agartha as a continent, or a lost civilization, I should say, come from a collection of books written by various different authors from, the mid-1800s all the way until today. And whenever I talk about Agartha in this video, I mean hollow earth Agartha and not flat earth Agartha. You don't know how frustrating it was to research this video and think this is the hollow earth Agartha and it's actually the flat earth Agartha, and you will have conspiracy theorists debating whether or not the earth is hollow or if it's flat, and somehow you feel like the dumb one. But Agartha as an idea emerged during the time of imperialism in Europe, whenever the white man was looking at cultures previously labeled uncivilized and thinking, maybe they're human, just maybe. While awful atrocities across the globe were being committed by colonial powers, this was really the first time that any actual lens of investigation was put on these cultures, at least to a widespread degree. So while a lot of these stories were twisted and reshaped in order to fit a sort of European cultural supremacy narrative, it was still the first time that they were being recorded and documented for a lot of stories and a lot of, classical myths that we would think we've known about for a while. Really, we only start to see become widely known during this time. And keen observers noticed that there were a lot of similar motifs being used in cultures and their stories that should have no contact with one another, like ideas of man being created from clay and ideas of a worldwide flood. They're common amongst cultures across the globe, and noticing these, a lot of people started to draw lines and connect dots that shouldn't have been connected, frankly. And one of these common motifs was the idea that there were people living underneath the ground. Stories about subterranean people from across the globe, particularly Southeast Asia, swept Europe, and mainly French occultists picked them up and clinged incredibly heavy to the notion that there was something underneath. Keep in mind that all of this is still happening in a time period where testimonies from psychics are admissible in court and cocaine is stuck in everything from cigarettes to soda. It was only natural for these tweakers to be a little crazy. I mean, think about it. You're in the 1800s, mid 1800s. What else are you gonna do if you're hopped up on cocaine? You're gonna come up with theories. And a lot of the conspiracies that you hear of do start to emerge from this time period. And, that's because we started to understand, but we didn't have the full picture. So we tried to fill in the dots as best we could. And sometimes, most of the time, 9 times out of 10, we made mistakes. And that's okay, because that's how science works. And thankfully, academics from across the world have worked tirelessly to fight this wave of bullshit and misinformation surrounding very interesting cultural beliefs and practices. But as Mark Twain once said, a lie can travel halfway across the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. Because of that, you see many instances amongst these conspiracy theories where theory will cite theory that will cite theory that is based on, more often than not, white supremacy. And that's why it's okay for me to go on my platform and attack these people's beliefs, because most of the time they are white supremacists and they know it's white supremacy, and they'll pretend like it isn't, but it is. And it's so blatantly obvious that it is, and they will just refuse to admit it. So that gives me the pass to sit in my high spinny chair and call idiots idiots. So without delaying my inevitable malware that I get from researching these topics, let's dive into the meat and potatoes of this video. But in order to properly understand the history of Agartha, you need to first understand the bullshit that the history of Agartha is based on. So, without further ado, let's talk about the history of Hollow Earth theory. Now, if you've spent enough time around your uncle or your grandpa at Thanksgiving who watches way too much History Channel, I'm sure you're at least familiar with the concept of Hollow Earth. I mean, the name's pretty much self-explanatory. The Earth is hollow. I mean, maybe there's no core, maybe there's a bunch of cores, maybe the Earth is a bunch of layers, maybe there's no mantle, crust, nothing. What if there's no Earth? Hollow Earth takes many forms. Sometimes it's hidden pockets beneath the Earth big enough for small families. Sometimes it's entire Earths hidden beneath our own. And according to believers, there are secret passageways hidden between layers that connect us to them, allowing widespread travel, potentially, if we were just to reach out for it. Unless you're that pilgrim freak Oceanus Hopkins, no matter where you were born on Earth, you're able to look down and see ground. And upon a little inspection with a handy-dandy tool known as a shovel, you can see that the dirt continues for a little bit. So, I mean, if you were living in a time period that was, didn't have access to modern knowledge of Earth's geology, you just know that, there's something underneath. Is it that unreasonable to think that eventually it might stop somewhere? So I can understand how a lot of these ideas could form before there was the sufficient evidence in order to disprove them. I mean, I don't go into caves that often. In fact, I tend to avoid going into caves as best I can. So I can kind of get how some people who aren't inquisitive enough to do the due diligence could think maybe the ground underneath stops at a certain point. Maybe there's people who live on the other side of that. What I don't understand is how that idea morphed into the modern belief of Agartha, and how some people can still believe that heaping pile of cat vomit. So to get into the actual history of Hollow Earth theory, we really only start to see documented evidence, at least in a scientific manner, starting in the year 1665, when the early scientific textbook Mundus Subterraneus was published. As plague ravaged the streets of London and that errant jackanape, Robert Hooke, was playing with his microscope, a German scholar, Athanasius Kircher, was compiling various works of geography into this textbook. I have beef with certain people throughout history. Robert Hooke is one of them. But Kircher, on the other hand, is an incredibly interesting character in early modern history. He's sort of like the German version of Da Vinci, and he's responsible for countless accomplishments. He was a Jesuit scholar, the same order that Pope Francis belonged to, who lived for most of the 1600s, and he's credited with discoveries in the fields of medicine and microbiology. He was also, an engineer and a theologian at the same time. Dude could do it all. But the widespread knowledge around Athanasius Kircher is due to his accomplishments in the fields of geology, paleontology, and archaeology. In fact, I had already known Kircher's name before researching this video, as I love history. If you know me, I'm always talking about history, and Athanasius Kircher he's deemed the father of Egyptology. So, needless to say, I was quite surprised whenever his name popped up while I was researching Hollow Earth theory. But, that's a neat little fun fact. The guy who helped kick off the modern fascination with ancient Egypt also helped kick off the modern fascination of the Aryan race living beneath Antarctica. And now that I start to think about it a little bit more, it makes more sense. Like, Kircher was a genius, don't get me wrong. His discoveries, his works, his accomplishments were monumental for the time. However, he was also the inventor of a device called the cat piano. Just like Hollow Earth theory, cat piano's name is also pretty self-explanatory. Exactly what you're thinking of right now. Cats strapped to a piano, yes. And whenever you press the keys, it makes the meows. But think about it, this is before the time of digital speakers. So if you want to get the cow to meow whenever you press a key, you gotta hit the cat. So in 1650, Athanasius gathered together anyone who was anything in Rome, and he was just oh so happy to show them his new musical device. It was a bunch of cats in cages arranged by pitch of meow, which doesn't even make sense because cats can make multiple pitches with their voice, just like humans can, and you can't control that. Only the cat can. So you can't even tune the cat piano. Anyways, like I was saying, all the rich guys and gals in Rome were gathered around to watch this demonstration, and I don't want to hear anything about it because I would be there too. I know that you would be there too. We would all be there watching the cat piano because that's hilarious. I want to watch some Jesuit go ham on a kitty keyboard. And then, once the crowd fell silent, Athanasius did ham it up. And by that I mean he hit the keys so hard that whenever the piano hammers, because that's how the noises in a piano are made, you hit the string. Whenever the hitter came down and hit the cat, they all started screaming and yelling, as cats do whenever you start to hit them. Pussy was flying left and right throughout the streets of Rome that day, and it's safe to say that Athanasius never busted out the cat piano very much afterwards. And I don't know if you've noticed the OSU garb behind me, but I'm going to OSU next year for engineering, and I noticed something that I had to bring up. Athanasius did the most engineer thing possible in this situation. The response, it's something I would say if I was in a similar position. He claimed that the reason the kitty piano didn't work out was because of insufficient feline disposition, rather than stabbing cats is not an instrument. So Kircher is not the best of guys. Like, he's smart, but He's got his quirkiness. So if you think about Mundus Subterraneus from the lens of the guy who made the cat piano and not viewing it as the guy who discovered Egyptology or created Egyptology, it starts to make a little bit more sense. And as if it couldn't get any worse, Edmund Halley of Halley's Comet started to elaborate further on Mundus Subterraneus and giving it more light, thinking it out, or as much thinking as you can put into Hollow Earth. And Halley is credited with coming up with this image of what Hollow Earth would supposedly look like. Him and Kircher both believed that the Earth existed as several layers of, I guess, rock and earth with channels of water connecting them at the poles. Since Kircher was already dead by the time that Halley was coming up with his expansions on Kircher's ideas, he was able to elaborate on them in ways that Kircher couldn't stop. You know, the ideas that Kircher had come up with were now becoming Halley's. Edmund Halley said that each layer of Earth was 500 miles deep, with layers of atmospheres separating the two of them, making each and every slice of Earth, as you go closer down, pretty much smaller globes within globes within globes, like a Russian nesting doll. Each shell had its own magnetic pole, its own rotational speed, and this was to explain some pretty odd compass readings that were, I mean, just so out of whack that the only solution was the inside of the Earth is also spinning, which was the solution. The inside of the Earth is spinning, but it's not more Earths inside the Earth spinning. It's a bunch of hot metal spinning. And they're pretty different, seeing as you can't live on a hot spinning ball of metal. Halley also believed that there was a layer of particles within the atmosphere that radiated light so vibrantly it completely illuminated the subterranean lands, and whenever they escaped through fissures in our layer of Earth, that was the cause of the northern lights, obviously. This belief really only seemed to stick with Halley, and eventually everybody kind of started to agree that it wasn't multiple layers, it was just one, and instead of having luminous gas lighting everything up, there was an inner sun where Earth's core should be. And this takes us to our final pioneer of Hollow Earth theory, an American lieutenant named John Cleves Symes Jr. Now, his name could be Sims or Symes. It's spelt with a Y. I think it's Sims, because my name's Dylan and it's spelt with a Y, and it's I think it's Sims. I'm going to say Sims. Why did I say Symes? Lieutenant Sims served in both the American Revolution and the War of 1812, unlike me, who is serving all the time. And for the most part, Sims had a pretty standard, uneventful military career, with the most notable event of his service being the command of a well-timed relief of American forces at the Battle of Niagara. And according to accounts, he was a rather well-respected man until 1815, whenever he was honorably discharged. He started to enter into the realm of pseudoscience. After a failed trading venture with the Fox natives located around the, at the time, frontier settlement of St. Louis, Missouri, Sims and his family settled down in Kentucky. And John Sims did not have any more luck with business in Kentucky, and the family faced a lot of hardship. And during this time, Sims began to start theorizing, and he would hypothesize on the conclusions drawn up by Halley on what the Earth looked like back in the 1600s. On April 18th of 1818, Sims published his debut pamphlet, Circular Number 1, in which he claims, I declare the earth is hollow and habitable within, containing a number of solid concentric spheres, one within the other, and that it is open at the poles 12 or 16 degrees, and I pledge my life in support of this truth, and am ready to explore the hollow, if the world will support and aid me in this undertaking. John always claimed to have no prior knowledge of Hawley's proposition, and he said that, they had only come to similar conclusions by observing the same activity. However, Sim's hypothesis and Hawley's hypothesis both share incredibly specific details, which kind of shut down Sim's gloating entirely. But despite the blatant plagiarism, Sims sent a copy of his pamphlet to anyone he could think of, really. Governments, princes, cities, and colleges across the globe all received copies of this work. And I imagine the recipients of these papers were incredibly confused. That is, if Sims was given the luxury of being received by any of these. Like, if I was the King of England and some failed businessman sent me a letter saying that the earth is hollow and I should give him money to explore it, I would probably just toss it in the fire. Especially if it's some bum talking about the poles whenever he's never been north of Quebec. Sims's son would come into picture in the 1870s, and he would write that his father was seen afterwards as insane, and critics called his father's work the product of a distempered imagination. And for a few years after Circular Number 1 was published, it was used as a punching bag in the news and in the media. I mean, think of it as the Riverdale of the 1800s. The only thing good about Sims's work was how easy it was to make fun of it. It seems like the entire world had a similar reaction to Sim's work. I mean, this wasn't the revolution in knowledge that John had hoped it would be, but amongst certain circles, he was a genius. There's a lot of people in the world, and a lot of people are idiots. And some of those idiots started to call Lieutenant Sims the Newton of the West, which doesn't make sense because Newton was from the West. It didn't just end at Circular Number 1. Sims published 8 total pamphlets further expanding on or defending Hollow Earth theory, as well as going on lecturing tours, further explaining to anyone face to face, this is what I believe, and you should believe it too. And unfortunately, Lieutenant Symes was never able to receive the funds required to travel to the poles and prove his theory right. However, he did end up inspiring a certain J.N. Reynolds to start lobbying the U.S. government for an American expedition to Antarctica. Jeremiah Reynolds was an explorer, a writer, a newspaper editor, and someone who frankly drank the Sims Kool-Aid. Born at the tail end of the 18th century, Reynolds is most famous for his 1839 account of the sperm whale Mocha Dick. And Reynolds' accounts of a rogue albino sperm whale off the coast of Chile served as the primary inspiration for Herman Melville and his book Of Mice and Men. No, I'm just kidding. It's Moby Dick. It's the whale book. And when I describe Reynolds as an explorer, I don't mean the kind of explorers like Captain Cook or Vasco da Gama, people who set out on an expedition with an end goal in mind and ended up completing it. He didn't even get close to completing his mission. If you ask me, he didn't even start it. He tried to convince John Adams Square that he should be able to take a couple boats filled with guys down to Antarctica and make a trip to the South Pole. But seeing as the South Pole wasn't reached until 1911 by Norwegian explorer Jesus, it's a good thing that Andrew Jackson showed up and put a stop to that really fast. Huh. Andrew Jackson does something good. Those are words I thought would never cross my lips. But anyways, if an American wants to get something done and the government won't pay for it, he'll find some billionaire schmuck to sink his money into it. And that's exactly what Reynolds did, and he secured enough money from private investments to launch an expedition of his own in 1829, filled with sailors and scientists, and they set off from New York City, hopefully, to reach Antarctica. But the expedition just went terribly, and after weeks of grueling sea travel, the crew reached the coast of Antarctica, did a little coastal mapping, and then had to return to Chile for a resupply. However, once they got to Chile, Reynolds was abandoned on an island after his crew mutinied. Reynolds and an artist, both abandoned because the crew didn't want to be in Antarctica. That's a reasonable request. Reynolds and the artist stayed on that island for 2 years before another American ship bothered to come and get him. This entire misadventure was published by Reynolds, and he garnered a lot of fame from these exploits. But he used that fame and that platform to give lectures on hollow earth theory and defend the conclusions drawn up by his teacher, John Sims. And I believe that these two Americans are necessary to talk about, as their works and experiences are vital to the foundations of the subject, which we will touch upon later. So, with all that being said, and no fewer than, I think, 3 tangents run on, we can now get into the actual history of Agartha as a separate entity opposed to Hollow Earth as a whole. The kingdom of Agartha is first mentioned in 1873 by French writer Louis Joliot, who worked as a barrister in Tahiti and southern India. When it came to myth and religion, since Europeans were first starting to document and show interest in that sort of stuff, Joliot was doing that, and men like him would take local stories and legends and try their hardest to place them into some sort of historical or scientific context, trying to find proof anywhere they can. They thought that myths were not inherently false, just stories of great acts or events from long ago which were twisted and reshaped into modern reiterations. While in India, Louis began looking for the origins of European institutions like Freemasonry and Christianity, but whenever he would tell his findings, he claimed that he got them from secret texts revealed to him, ancient script from 15,000 years ago that Louis was only privy to. And while documenting this supposed 15,000-year-old knowledge, Louis became the first person to document Agartha. Destroyed thousands and thousands of years ago, Agartha was the ancient capital of India. It was ruled by the physical manifestations of the gods on earth, and it's evident from Louis's writings that he was just grabbing various cultural legends from both India and Scandinavia, tying them together in any way possible. And yeah, it's exactly what you're thinking. Asgartha, or Asgarth, is just another spelling of Asgard, the realm of the Norse gods. Louis's writings eventually became widespread across France, even though it was really just built on a mistranslation. And discussion of Agartha finally reached the shores of Europe after a few years. But this Agartha was not the one we know today, and it would take another man's stupidity to bring the modern understanding of Agartha into picture. Parisian author and occultist Alexandre St. Yves is the final person in this big, grand history that is. Born to a family of well-off intellectuals, St. Yves never had to worry about funding. I mean, he married wealthy, ensuring that money wasn't an issue. And as all rich kids are, St. Yves felt like he was different and edgy and misunderstood. So he started to hang around many of the occultist circles within Paris, which was the Victorian equivalent of going to a Panic at the Disco concert with your scene friends in 2008. He was becoming a very well-known name within the counterculture of Victorian France. He was most well known in occultist circles, and he was in the streets of Paris when Louis Joliet, with his pre-Himmler Aryan race lore, started to become a sensation. And in 1885, his life was forever changed whenever a group of Eastern Hindu initiates led by a Prince Haji Sharif visited his apartment in Paris. St. Yves claimed in his writings that Haji Sharif had taught him the secrets of astral projection, and he spoke to him about the lost kingdom of Agartha. Now, I want to say that Alexandre was known for his proposal of the idea of synarchy, which is kind of like an inverse of anarchy. It's really just what a government should do or how a government should function while still maintaining class distinctions in an ideal society. It's weird. It was hard to understand. I don't even think I understand it completely. The way I got it was kind of like capitalism, but a little bit of communism, but capitalism, but a little bit of communism. Like we've been good. They're giving us a little bit of communism. But I bring this up because many have noticed that the ascended masters of Agartha, which is what St. Yves called their god kings, rule in a very similar manner to what Alexandre would want a leader to rule in synarchy. Anyways, after allegedly mastering the art of astral projection, Alexandre St. Yves claimed to have visited the marvelous kingdom and to have documented his journey into a private diary. Yay! And he starts out strong in this diary, pretty much punching Louis Joliet in the face, stating that the people of Agartha moved underground in order to stave off their city's destruction. They're still kicking. He was wrong. St. Yves made contact with the people living in Agartha, and these Agarthai, as he called them, were superior to us surface dwellers in every manner you can think of. They were smarter, both spiritually and scientifically. The Agarthai possessed spiritual enlightenment and technological mastery. They had combined science, philosophy, and religion into a perfect synchronization. Their governments were perfectly operated, managing to uphold both spiritual and secular law to a degree of perfection. Their lands were lush, fertile, and radiant, although deep beneath the surface and employing extremely advanced technology, there was no blemish on the land which Agartha stood on. Networks of these enlightened cities, all ruled by similar god kings, dominated the landscape. Their monumental construction projects were everywhere, and they were built with natural and divine will, featuring sacred geometry. The cities existed within perfect harmony in every sense imaginable. And St. Yves stated that there were secret tunnels used by the inhabitants of Agartha, connecting them to places like ancient Egypt and India and even Atlantis. common cultural elements like mythological dragons, floods, architectural pyramids, the megaliths. Those were all Agarthans. Every single myth, every single religion was just a bastardized retelling of real Agarthai history. When St. Eves would talk about Agartha, he would talk as if he had actually been there. And his mannerisms gave credit to other movements within occultism like astral projection, reality shifting, and even manifestation. If you think about it, St. Eves was the first TikTok girly, and you TikTok girlies need to step up your game. You're shifting into Harry Potter universe. We need to go back to Agartha. With all that being said, that brings us to the modern perspective of Agartha. Hundreds of years of outlandish stories and untestable theories with connections between Norse and Indians all rolled into one, just completely blown out of proportion, is how we get here now. But the story doesn't end there. In fact, things are just about to get even more interesting, because in the years of 1946 and 47, we surface dwellers got the closest we ever have to a diplomatic relationship with the Kingdom of Agartha. Let's talk about Admiral Richard E. Byrd and Operation High Jump. In 1946, just about a year after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the U.S. Navy approved a 6 to 8 week long training exercise and research expedition to Antarctica. Almost 5,000 men, 13 ships, and numerous aircraft took part in the exercise, and this was all organized by the famous aviator Admiral Richard Byrd. The exercise only lasted the minimum allotted time, 6 weeks, before suddenly returning back to America. According to reports, the exercise went off without incident, and the sailors accomplished their mission shortly and turned right back around. That is, if you take the word of the US government. Speculations surrounding the speed of the operation led many to believe that the Navy found something down there. It wasn't helping that Admiral Byrd was supposedly looking like Michael J. Fox whenever asked about his time in Antarctica, which is really odd because at this point in time, Byrd was the guy when it came to Antarctic exploration. He helped establish an American air base on the ice during his first expedition between 1928 and 1930, and he provided a lot of the aerial map data from his Ford trimotor. After taking 3 years off, he went back for 2 more years for more scientific research, but during this second expedition, Byrd almost managed to blunder in a way that would have kept this entire video from happening in the first place. Like, this was one of the dumbest decisions a polar explorer could make. He spent 5 months alone in a forward weather station called Advanced Base, 123 miles away from the camp of Little America, the air base he established in his first expedition. Imagine being 2 weeks away from any other life, operating a weather station in the most remote place on the planet. That's an indie horror game waiting to happen. But it wasn't the isolation, madness, or some monster lurking in the shadows which almost killed Admiral Byrd during his 5-month isolation. It was carbon monoxide poisoning caused by faulty ventilation, which almost did him in. In May of 1934, Byrd started showing signs of illness, but he kept pushing on and kept operating the weather station alone. But from June to July, he just kept getting worse and worse and worse. Like, he would drunk call, or rather, carbon monoxide call the station of Little America all the time, and people would get worried. So they started to arrange a rescue party, but the logistics were incredibly challenging due to the fact that they're in Antarctica and it's hell. Because of that, the first two missions had to turn back because of worsening weather conditions and mechanical failures. But by August, they were able to get him, only after a couple months. Bird was able to be rescued just in time because as his rescue party arrived at Advanced Station, they found him on the floor, incredibly frail and weak, about to die. The men had him nursed back to health by October, and an airplane was able to be sent out to rescue the men. From what I read, I never saw anything that said, and the men fixed the carbon monoxide leak at Advanced Station, so they might have just said, if you get carbon monoxide poisoning, we all get carbon monoxide poisoning, and Bird pulled through because he was with the homies. But anyways, our beloved Admiral published his account of the incident and a retelling of his time spent alone at the weather station in his famous 1938 novel, Alone. He was a celebrity among the people of America, and he had an entire radio station set up so that he could broadcast his research and his studies in Antarctica to millions around the world. Then, when World War II came around, Admiral Byrd worked heavily in logistics and training for Arctic and Antarctic operations, helping to ensure that Allied forces could whoop Nazi ass in any environment. And it was only until after the war had ended that Byrd was finally able to return to his lovely little ice sheet for Operation High Jump. But the odd timing for an expedition to Antarctica, just so suddenly after the war's end, and the general shady nature of how the participants acted created a prime opportunity for conspiracy theories to emerge. Admiral Byrd was noted to have had genuine concerns for the possibility that a nation could launch an attack from the polar regions. So, he was more willing than most to lead an expedition to make sure that the South Pole was secured from hostile forces. But, according to theorists, the hostile forces were already there. Okay, I need you to forget everything your history teacher taught you about the end of World War II. It's a requirement going forward because we're about to dive into the motherload of bullshit. Rather than being put on trial and executed at Nuremberg, supposedly high-ranking Nazi officials and scientists escaped to Antarctica rather than Argentina. They went down to Antarctica on the direction of Heinrich Himmler, who was the leader of the SS. A notorious conspiracy theorist, Himmler constantly searched for ways to prove what his dictators said about the Aryan race's superiority. He supposedly came into contact with the same ancient kingdom of mystics which St. Ives had visited decades prior. These wise men gave Himmler the knowledge of how to construct wonder weapons which could be used for war. The noted pacifist kingdom taught Nazi engineers how to build flying saucers and told them to go on their own expedition down to Antarctica so that they could get into contact with one another. And to take a breath from the made-up stuff, the Nazis did have a real expedition to Antarctica between 1938 and 39. They placed some scientists on the ice, claimed the territory they called New Swabia, and went back to Germany. However, they were all researchers and not military personnel, so they went down there, but they just went to Antarctica and came back. There's not much you can do in Antarctica. So, break time over, back to the made-up stuff. The German Antarctic expedition were responsible for the establishment of an advanced research and technology facility which housed the remnants of Nazi scientists and high command after the war was over. And it was the capture of this military facility, known as Base 211, that was the goal of Admiral Byrd's Operation High Jump. During his time in Antarctica, Byrd was startled by what he saw. Supposedly, one day while the American forces were out on patrol, they were attacked by flying saucers which rose up from underneath the water. These discs moved at breakneck speeds, engaging in dogfights with Byrd and his squadrons of aircraft. They employed advanced energy weapons and ate right through most of the Admiral's fighters. This is the alleged reason as to why the expedition returned so promptly and under such mysterious circumstances. And I think that if America is going to keep being compared to the Roman Republic, what with the collapse of our representation within government and our democracy as a whole, then I want to see this as sort of our Teutoburg Forest. Ever since then, we've just let some of the most vile and disgusting people on the planet remain in their high castle at the bottom of the world. So, this video is already going to be my longest by far, I can already tell, but I still have some more that I need to talk about, so I plan on turning this into a 2-part series. I promise you're gonna get another upload. You won't have to wait another 8 months for it. But now that we've got an understanding of Agartha and Hollow Earth theory and how they relate to these awful ideas built on prejudice and ignorance, I plan on going through the infamous Lost Diary of Admiral Byrd and his expedition into the Kingdom of Agartha. Like, it's a book detailing how Admiral Byrd flew his plane through the hole into Hollow Earth, and it's so obviously fake, and it's filled to the brim with all sorts of wild happenings between Byrd and the Agarthi, and I want to read it so badly, and this is a perfect excuse. It really amazes me how some people can actually believe some of these bullshit conspiracy theories and then try and convince you that, you just don't have an open mind. My mind is open. I love conspiracy theories and cryptids probably more than the average person, but at the end of the day, I understand that these stories are meant for entertainment. But there are some people who don't see things the same way, and in order to conclude the narrative of Agartha, as I've started for us, I have to talk about the Nazis. The Indiana Jones franchise and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. I mean, I've tried to hint that there's very much some white supremacy elements in these stories, and it's very evident, honestly. I don't know why I tried to toe it. Maybe just because this is YouTube and you can't really be plain and upfront with that kind of stuff on YouTube if you want to go far. But a lot of these beliefs, plain and simple, are built upon archaic ideas of race theory. So I bring up Indiana Jones as a place of frustration within myself. Like, I love the movies, and Indiana Jones is probably what inspired me to get into history at such a young age, but I hate how everything is Nazis nowadays. I get it. Himmler was crazy, and it's confusing how such a paranoid and unstable individual can rise up so high in the leadership of a nation, but when you tie him to your conspiracy theories, it doesn't add the bit of historical baggage that people think it does. It only serves to link you and your beliefs to that of Himmler and his beliefs. It makes it impossible to separate the two of you. In order to believe in Base 211, you must first believe that the Nazis had the capacity to invent the technological miracles supposedly being constructed there. And to get there, you must believe that the Aryan race has a superior intellect and physical capability than the countless other groups of people on the planet. That's why I believe it's so important to stay skeptical of everything. Believing in conspiracy over truth doesn't make you a skeptic. Questioning both the truth and the conspiracy under the same lens is what does. In rejecting one belief, some have taken upon another, even more absurd idea as to how the world truly functions. That's where the real damage of these theories comes from. They make you think that what you're doing is just that, thinking, when in reality you just end up regurgitating the same conclusions drawn up by boomers who get tricked by the AI pictures on Facebook. But I'm getting a little too worked up, it's getting late, I have to cut it off, or I'm gonna end up adding another hour to the video that I have to edit down, and that's gonna be a pain. With all that being said, thank you for coming to Agarthan History 101. This might be my oddest video to date, just with the sheer amount of jumping around from time to time that we have to do, but I'm really happy with how this turned out, and I hope you're happy with it too. I know it's been several months since my last upload, I apologize for that, but I'm finishing up my senior year of high school, and I only now have time to return to the channel, but it seems like you guys found the time to return here as well, and I greatly appreciate you all for that. If you have any questions or any suggestions for me, this channel, these videos, please feel free to leave a comment on the video or message me on Instagram. The link to that should be into the description, but for now, I have to get going. I'm sorry. My 7'2" Agarthan shoddy just brain blasted me that her parents weren't going to be on this layer of crust tonight, so I gotta go see to it that she's taken care of. But before I leave you, thank you, truly, for watching the video, coming back to the channel after so long. It truly does mean a lot to me, and I hope I see you again next time when we dive into Admiral Byrd's most harrowing adventure of all, becoming the first man to enter the Hollow Earth. Bye-bye.